Hello, neighbors. Before we get into the episode, just a couple quick things I'd like to mention. If you go to the podcast website, neighborontheleft.com, there's a whole bunch of things for you to check out there, including the contacts page, where you can see all of the social media links. And these days, I do post a lot of stuff just about daily on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. A lot of interesting stuff there. If you stop by, please like, share, and follow if you would. Also on the website, there is the episodes section where you can download or stream any episode of the podcast going all the way back to the beginning. And of course, the blog section. I make a post for every episode of the podcast, and it includes all of the sources that I use. All right, let's start the episode. If you spend much time on social media looking at the kind of things I do, you've seen this kind of post. I'm sure you have. Maybe it's a screenshot of something Donald Trump supposedly said. Maybe it's a video of some MAGA politician saying something so absurd, so cruel, so perfectly on brand that your first reaction isn't skepticism, or at least mine isn't for my sensibilities. What happens first is recognition. Well, of course he said that. Of course they did that. Of course this is real. And often it is. Sometimes the quote is accurate. The video is complete. Sometimes the headline is fair and the chart is presenting good data and the story is every bit as bad as it first appears. But sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the quote is fake. Sometimes video starts a little too late or ends a little too early. Sometimes the headline is taking a real story and stretching it to the point of snapping. Sometimes a photograph is from another country or another year or another event altogether. Sometimes the whole thing is nonsense wrapped around a conclusion that I happen to agree with. And that's the dangerous part, because when a claim tells me something I already believe, I don't feel the same instinct to challenge it. If someone posts something flattering about Trump, I'm immediately suspicious. Show me the source. Give me the context. Where did that number come from? Where is that fact located? But when someone posts something that makes Trump appear dishonest or foolish or corrupt or dangerous, well, that fits the pattern, doesn't it? It feels familiar. It feels plausible. It feels true before I have established that it's true. And that's when I make myself stop. I don't ask only whether I agree with it. I ask whether it actually happened. I don't want to spread something false just because it makes the right person look bad. Trump does enough real things. MAGA has given us enough real material. I don't need imaginary evidence, because the lie that insults my worldview is easy to reject. The lie that agrees with me, that's the one most likely to get past the front door. Hello, neighbors. You're listening to a Friday edition of Back Porch Files from your neighbor on the left, the podcast about progressive politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, and I am your host. Today, I want to talk about why I fact check, and more specifically, why I fact check people that I already agree with. Not just conservatives, not just MAGA accounts, not just politicians and commentators I already distrust. I do check liberals and progressives. I check Democratic accounts. I check creators that I like. And I especially check the posts that tell me something that is outrageous, but exactly what I already believe in its genre or its basic tenets, because agreement isn't evidence. Now, This is not me pretending both sides are equally dishonest. I don't believe that. I think the modern MAGA movement and much of conservative media have built an entire ecosystem around distortion, conspiracy, selective context, and let's be honest, outright lies. There are a million different pieces of evidence to prove that, but their dishonesty does not excuse carelessness from me. I post a lot of content. I make videos, I write commentary, I record this podcast. I ask people to trust what I say and sometimes to share it with others. And I think that means I have a responsibility. I don't fact check because I believe I'm immune to misinformation. I fact check because I know that I'm not. I know how easy it is to believe something that feels right. I know how tempting it is to share first and ask questions later. So this episode is about the standards that I try to follow. What I check, what I don't share, why I sometimes challenge posts from people on my own side of the political line, and what I believe I owe the people who trust me enough to pass my work along. Now, the first rule I try to follow is simple. I don't share first and verify later. Because sharing is not passive. The moment I pass something along, I'm no longer just looking at the claim, I'm endorsing the claim. Maybe not every word of it, maybe not every implication, but I am still telling people who follow me, this is worth your attention. I believe this is reliable enough to put my name beside it. And I think that matters. So I don't treat a screenshot as a source. A screenshot can show that somebody typed some words. It does not prove the words are real or complete or current or honestly presented. I don't assume quotation marks make a quotation authentic. I don't assume a video shows the whole context of a claim or a quote. I don't assume that a chart is honest because I like the conclusion that it comes to. And I don't assume that 10 different accounts repeating the same story automatically means there are 10 different sources. Sometimes there is one weak source bouncing around the internet wearing 10 different hats. So I look, where did the quote come from? Is there a full video? What does the original article actually say? Is there a transcript? Is there a court filing, a government report, a public statement, or some other document underneath the claim? Where did this particular number they're telling me come from? Does the source support the conclusion people are drawing from it? And sometimes the result is not neat. Sometimes I find enough to say the claim is true. Sometimes I find that it's partly true, but the framing is off. Sometimes the basic fact is real, but the conclusion has been stretched far beyond the evidence. And sometimes I get to the end of the search and the only honest thing I can say is I can't confirm this. And that's not satisfying. It may not, make for a dramatic post, but it's still an answer. I don't need certainty badly enough to manufacture it. And I don't want to hand to other people something shaky and hope that nobody leans on it too hard. Because when I share a claim, I attach a little piece of my account to it. The your neighbor on the left brand, if I want to be so bold as to call it that. I want that name to mean I did the work first, and people know that I do. So when I see a post that looks wrong, I usually don't just scroll past it. Not always. I'm not spending every waking hour patrolling Facebook like the deputy sheriff of somebody's, uncle's meme page. But if the claim catches my attention, if it matters, if it's spreading, or if it's presented with a level of certainty the evidence doesn't support, I will say something. Sometimes I will say something. Again, it depends on how much time is available in the moment and how big of a deal I think the claim could be. Sometimes I'll leave a link. Sometimes I'll point out missing context. Sometimes I explain that the headline doesn't match the article. Sometimes I say the video is incomplete. Sometimes I just simply say, what's your source on this? I can't find it. I can't verify it. Now, in rare occasions, the person who posted it might reconsider. They will read the source and they will edit the post or delete it, or at least think twice the next time. That can happen, but it's rare. But I mean, let's be honest. Sometimes they get defensive. Sometimes they act as though checking the claim is somehow more offensive than spreading it. Ironically, I've seen sub comments, saying things like calling me a MAGA troll. I'm not sure how you get to that point when I'm using a handle like neighbor on the left, but okay. Most of the time they ignore the correction completely. That's the honest truth. But they're not the only person reading the comment, hopefully. That matters. There are people who open the comments and never say a word. They don't hit like, they don't jump into the argument. They may not even remember, my account specifically, but they see the original claim and then they see that somebody challenged it. They see that there's no source, or they see missing context, or they see that the story may not be as settled as the original post made it sound. And that is often the real reason that I do it. I may not be able to change the post or stop the post, but I may not be able to convince the person who shared it, but I can put a small speed bump in front of the misinformation. And I can make it work a little harder. I can give the next person a reason to slow down before they share it too. One comment will not fix the internet. Believe me, I know that. And believe me, if that were possible, somebody would have done it by now and charged us $14 a month for the premium version. But silence can look like agreement. And when a questionable claim is moving through the room with this complete confidence that they do, I don't mind being the person who says, hold on a second, maybe that's not accurate. One of the strangest things about political fact-checking is the way that people treat a correction like a declaration of loyalty. If I say that a claim about Donald Trump is false, some people hear, oh, so now you're defending Trump. Yeah, that's not the case. If you look at my content, if you listen to this podcast, you would know that that is not the case. I'm not defending Trump. I'm rejecting one false claim about him in that particular case. And those are certainly not the same thing. I can believe that Donald Trump is dishonest and dangerous and corrupt and reckless and profoundly unfit for office. And believe me, I do. And I can believe all those things without believing every single accusation made against him is true. I can oppose MAGA content creators and commenters without pretending every anti-MAGA post is automatically accurate. I can think a Republican politician has done 10 terrible things and still say the 11th thing didn't happen if it didn't happen. Facts do not owe allegiance to any political team, and neither do I, for that matter. Trump has done plenty of real things worth posting about and commenting on and getting out there for people to absorb. I don't need imaginary ones. I don't need a fake quote to explain why I oppose him. I don't need a misleading chart. I don't need a video that starts 6 seconds too late and ends 6 seconds too early. The documented factual record is more than sufficient. Correcting one false allegation certainly does not erase the rest of that record. It does not by any stretch of the imagination clear him, it means I'm throwing out one piece of evidence because it doesn't belong in the conversation. And honestly, I think the opposite approach is dangerous. If I defend bad information simply because it, annoys MAGA, then I'm as guilty as anybody. I'm not protecting the truth. I'm protecting my team. That's how standards rot. First, the false claim is excused because the target deserves criticism. Then it's repeated because the larger point is true, or simply because it fits the narrative. And then anybody who objects is accused of helping the enemy. And I don't want to overstate this. This isn't the reaction constantly, but it does happen. And then before long, the movement no longer asks whether something's accurate. It asks whether it's useful. And there's a lot of that goes on these days. And I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want a politics where facts are drafted into service and told which jersey to wear. If a claim is false, I want to know. Even when I liked it. Maybe especially when I liked it. There's a phrase I hear all the time when a political claim falls apart. Someone will say, well, the larger point is true. Maybe the quote is fake. Maybe that video is a bad example of it because it's a bit misleading. Maybe the statistic in this particular chart was wrong, but supposedly none of that matters because the broader argument remains valid. And I don't buy that. If there are plenty of real examples, then use the real examples. If the larger point is true, it deserves evidence that's true as well. A strong argument doesn't need support that's counterfeit. And bad information doesn't just sit harmlessly beside the good information. It changes the conversation. Instead of talking honestly about, actual corruption or actual dishonesty or actual abuse of power, we end up talking about the details of a bogus post. The person being criticized gets to step away from the real issue and point at the mistake. And at that point, then the argument is no longer, look at what the politician did. Now it's, look at these people willing to lie, or look what they're willing to believe. And that's a gift. That's a gift to the bad politician in this scenario. Bad evidence doesn't strengthen a good case. It gives the defense an exhibit. And I've seen people try to rescue a false claim by saying, oh, well, it sounds like something he would say. I guess, but that's not enough. Plausibility isn't proof. A person's terrible record does not give me permission to invent one more entry on it. And again, I don't think it's necessary. Honestly, the larger point excuse teaches a terrible lesson. It says accuracy is optional if the emotional conclusion feels right. It says details only matter when they hurt the other side. That the usefulness of a claim is more important than whether the claim is true. And that's a loophole, not a standard. I do not want to build an argument out of material I would reject immediately if it came from a conservative account, or the kind of material that would come from a conservative account. I don't want to ask people to overlook bad evidence simply because they agree with my conclusion. And I don't want to defend something that I know is weak just because admitting it is weak might be embarrassing for the person who posted it. So, if it's true, use the other examples. Use verified quotes. Use the complete video. Find the real number. Use the documented story. If the case is as strong as we say it is, and I believe it is, then we shouldn't do this. The case should survive without having to throw fake bricks. Now, none of this means that every bad post deserves the same response. You can't treat a typo like propaganda. You can't treat an honest mistake like an organized lie. And people sometimes get things wrong. They misread an article. They remember a quote incorrectly. They trust a source that turns out not to deserve that trust. Very often it's a question of posting too quickly. They miss context, and that happens. It's happened to me. So I try to distinguish between being mistaken, being careless, being reckless, and being deliberately dishonest. Those are all not the same thing. If someone shares a bad claim and corrects it when shown better information, that matters. If they're willing to say, I got this wrong, that matters. But if they leave the false post up and ignore the evidence and keep repeating it anyway, that matters too. And intent is not always easy to know, of course. I feel like I can usually tell whether a statement is false. I can't always tell whether the person knew it was false. So I don't take to calling people liars unless I have some real basis for saying they lied. But I also don't pretend that carelessness is harmless. If you have a large audience and you're making serious accusations, I believe you have a responsibility to do more than glance at a meme and hit repost. Good intentions do not make bad information accurate. And you can be as passionate as you want to about politics. It doesn't erase the damage of false information. Being on the right side of the larger issue doesn't excuse recklessness with the details. The response should fit the mistake, I guess, is what I'm saying. A correction does not always require, a public execution. Sometimes it requires a simple sentence. This is not accurate. Sometimes that's enough. But silence is not proportionality. Silence is silence. And I'm not going to confuse kindness toward the person with indifference to the facts. And I what I'm saying here is all of this applies to me. It has to. I do not get to demand corrections from other people and then treat my own mistakes like some sort of classified material. I can get things wrong. I can misread a source. I can miss context. I can rely on early reporting that later changes. I can state something too broadly. I can reach a conclusion that goes further than the evidence follows. And fact checking that I do on my own doesn't make me immune to mistakes. It gives me a responsibility when the error is mine. And correcting myself is not always comfortable. It can be embarrassing, especially when I've said something confidently, especially when people have already shared the post or repeated the claim, especially when somebody I disagree with is the person pointing it out. But discomfort is not an excuse to protect the mistake. If I'm wrong, correcting it isn't an option. I should say that I got it wrong. I should explain what the accurate information is. I should correct the original post if I can, or take it down, or whatever. I should make the correction visible enough that the people who saw the mistake have a reasonable chance of seeing the fix. I quietly deleting a mistaken post is one step, but pretending it never happened is not always the best option. I don't blame anyone for taking my words to mean what my words actually said, and I don't like to hide behind the idea that my larger point was still true. The correction is part of the original responsibility. Now, making a mistake does not automatically destroy credibility. Nobody who posts regularly, speaks publicly, or works with developing news is ever going to be 100% perfect. That's not a realistic standard. The real question is, what happens next? What happens when there's something that was posted that was incorrect? Do you acknowledge it? Do you fix it? Do you learn from it, or do you double down because protecting your pride suddenly matters more than protecting the truth? My credibility doesn't depend on pretending I've never been wrong. At least that's not what I believe. It depends on what I do after I discover that I was wrong. I want people to know when I know something. I want them to know when I'm offering an opinion. I want them to know when I'm making an inference. And when the evidence isn't there, I want to be able to say, I can't confirm this. And I don't see that as weakness. That's honesty with the brakes working. Thankfully, I've had very few things fact-checked and addressed to me as having been false or mistaken. And I hope that continues. I hope my record continues on that positive. Now, as I said, I post a lot of content, podcast episodes, videos, social media posts, written commentary, graphics, clips. And that means I'm not only responsible for what I believe, I'm responsible for what I hand to other people. When somebody shares one of my videos, they're doing more than helping me reach a larger audience. They're putting a little piece of their own name behind mine. They're telling their friends and their followers or their family or whoever, this is worth watching. And the inference is, this is reliable. This is something I believe. And I tend to take that seriously. I don't want somebody to share my content and defend it in the comments or anywhere else and then discover that I gave them a load of garbage. I don't want them embarrassed because I skipped the full article or ignored the original source or trusted a screenshot that shouldn't have been trusted. I want people to be able to share my content without crossing their fingers. That does not mean I'm promising perfection. I've lived long enough to know I can't do that. What I can promise is that I tried to verify the factual foundation, that I considered the context, that I identified opinions as opinions, and that if a mistake is pointed out to me, I'll correct something once I find out that it was wrong. Mistakes don't always disappear when the post does. They follow you. If I use bad information, it makes me look bad in that moment. And it, frankly, it should, but it can also get dragged into the next argument. I can publish something later that is completely accurate, fully sourced, carefully explained, and have someone show up saying, why should anyone believe this guy? Remember that other video? And I'm not saying I've had this happen. I'm saying this is part of my thought process. Now, I mean, logically speaking, one aired post doesn't disprove the new post. A mistake yesterday doesn't make a verified claim false today, but credibility isn't a math equation. People remember errors, and trolls preserve them like family heirlooms. One bad post becomes a receipt they keep in their pocket, waiting for the next time I would say something that they don't like. And I can't stop dishonest people from attacking accurate work. They're going to do that no matter how careful anybody is. But I don't need to make their job easier by handing them a legitimate example of carelessness. And I see other creators do exactly that all the time. I see MAGA and conservative content creators post a dramatic claim or a take on something with this absolute ironclad confidence when the real story is sitting right there for anybody to find. Sometimes it's an article they're discussing. Sometimes, it's a video clip. Sometimes it's a quotation that could be checked in less time than it took them to record what they're talking about. I'm not talking about cracking some encrypted foreign intelligence file. They just have to open another tab. But they don't. They post the claim, and then somebody stitches the video, somebody finds the full quote, somebody pulls up the document, somebody shows the missing context, and suddenly the original creator looks ridiculous. At best, they look like a goober who could not be bothered to check. At worst, they look like they knew exactly what they were doing. And sometimes you can't tell which one it is. Was it dishonesty or laziness or incompetence? Did they simply care more about the outrage than the truth? Once the audience is forced to choose among those possibilities, the game's over anyway. The damage is already done. I watch that happen over and over and over, and every time I think the same thing. What were you thinking? I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the clip that gets stitched because somebody else took 10 minutes to do a search that I should have done before I made the post. Being first is not worth being publicly wrong, at least to me. An outrage may get the original claim moving, but the correction is what people remember when they decide to trust you the next time. And none of this changes because the careless creator happens to be on my side. I guess that's the test. It's easy to demand evidence from people that I already distrust. It's easy to want to fact check MAGA accounts. It's easy to point at conservative misinformation and call it propaganda. And it often is. The harder question, though, is what I do when I find bad information that helps me, when it supports my argument, when it attacks somebody I already oppose, when correcting it is inconvenient. If I refer to MAGA misinformation as propaganda, but I call misinformation from a progressive or liberal content creator enthusiasm, then I don't have a standard. I have a costume. If their misleading edit is manipulation, but ours is simply, capturing a larger truth, then I'm not defending honesty. I'm defending usefulness. And if honesty matters only when it hurts my opponent, honesty isn't the principle. I am a progressive. I believe in evidence. I believe in science. I believe in responsible journalism. I believe public figures should be held accountable for what they actually say and do. But those values mean nothing if I only apply them outward. I have to survive contact with people I like. I have to survive contact with creators I respect. I have to survive contact with my intended audience, and they have to survive contact with me. And maybe in the grand scheme of things, those stakes aren't high, but they're high to me. I believe MAGA is dangerous. I believe Donald Trump has done enormous, almost incalculable damage. I believe the conservative information ecosystem has made dishonesty easier to spread and harder to correct. But the seriousness of that threat doesn't give me room for bad evidence when the claim is on my side. I think it gives me less. The more serious the accusation, the more careful I should be. The more dangerous the movement, the less willing I should be to weaken the case against it by giving false information. I don't need to soften my opinions. I don't need to pretend both sides are equal. I don't need to become neutral about things like cruelty and corruption and authoritarianism. But what I do need is I need the facts underneath those opinions to be real. I don't want the truth only when it helps my side. I just want the truth. I don't want standards that disappear the moment they become inconvenient. And I don't want to become the thing that I criticize. So I'll go back to that original post that I was talking about, the hypothetical post, the one that says exactly what I already believe, the one that attacks somebody I already oppose, the one that would probably get shares and comments and attention, the one that feels true, but I can't verify it. So I leave it alone. Nobody sees that decision. Nobody congratulates me for the misinformation I didn't spread. Nobody applauds the correction I never had to issue. There's no viral moment attached to restraint. But I think that decision still matters. It matters because I want people to trust what I give them. It matters because I want someone who shares my work and puts a little piece of their own reputation behind it to not regret it. It matters because the people reading the comments deserve to know when a claim is uncertain. It matters because my critics will remember my mistakes, and sometimes they'll be right to do so. It matters because I can't demand standards from everybody else and suspend them when they become inconvenient for me. That's, in a nutshell, that is a big part of the problems that we have today. Agreement is not evidence. A satisfying claim is not automatically a true claim. And a good cause does not become stronger when I support it with bad information. We all make mistakes, including me, and when I do, I should want to correct them. I will encounter claims I can't confirm, and when that happens, I don't post them. I will see information that helps my side and hurts the other side. That is when I should be the most careful, because credibility is not something that you announce. It's something that you build one post at a time, one correction at a time, one quiet decision not to share something at a time. I would rather make a slower argument that is true than a viral argument that's false. I would rather admit uncertainty than manufacture confidence. I would rather correct myself than just simply protect my pride. And I would rather lose an argument honestly than win one with something that was never true. All right, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to download and listen to this installment of Back Porch Files from your neighbor on the left. I'm thrilled that you did. I'm very interested to hear what you think about this topic, or any topic that I've talked about, or any topic you'd like to hear me talk about. All the information on how to get in touch with me was at the top of the episode, so please do so. I would love to hear from you. The weekend is here, so I'll be back on Monday with another full episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. Between now and then, stay engaged, stay kind, and have the kind of weekend you'd wish for others.